All right, let's start. So welcome everyone who dialed in today for this webinar, and also to everybody who is watching this recording. So you're welcome to ask any questions through the Q&A function on the webinar, and if you're live. And at the very end, we'll announce the people who won the book. 5 people will win the book out of the ones who signed up. So today I have here with me Jeanne Bliss, and Jeanne is a true pioneer in customer centricity.
That means I'm old.
No. She is the founder and the president of Customer Bliss, and she also co-founded the Customer Experience Professional Association. And what I think is really impressive is that she founded the actual role of Chief Customer Officer, and she held the first positions with this title at Land's End and at Microsoft, just 2 examples. And she's a frequent keynote speaker. She has appeared on Forbes and MSBN and Fast Company. And recently she launched a really cool movement. So if a book is not enough, we now have a movement, the Make My Mom Proud movement. And it basically allows you to post a picture of your mom and talk about what have you done today to make your mom proud and also serve your customers better. So welcome, Jeanne.
Thank you. So nice to be with everybody. Hello.
Great. So over to you. I'd love to start with a little stroll down memory lane and learn how you made your way into this wonderful world of being at the core of customer centricity and customer experience.
Well, it was lucky initially. I happened to answer, actually, this was a long time ago, 1983. So I answered a newspaper ad to go train the 2,000 phone operators at Land's End at the time. So my background was in apparel design and marketing. And one of the things I was going to be training all the phone operators in, besides service, was the construction of all these clothes. So I thought, wouldn't that be fantastic? And I went out to Wisconsin and started doing that role. And really, because I was so close to the phone operators, this was before the internet, right? This is 1983. And because I was so close to the operators and all the calls, I started peppering the CEO and the board with things that we needed to do. We need to do this, we need to do that. And a couple years into my role, they said, okay, you smarty pants, you now report to us, and you are the conscience of the company as we're growing 80% a year. And what's interesting is that I started as the conscience of a company, and then this book I've just written is about putting conscience into your company in the decisions that you make. So Land's End was the gift of my career. If I hadn't gone there, I wouldn't have this career, because it was very much about customers and humanity and doing the right thing and being good people and delivering in the right way. So it gave me such a wonderful background. And then I was hooked. And so I deliberately then moved to these companies. So Mazda had just come out with a Miata and the RX-7, and they were talking about Kaizen, and we were trying to wrap an experience around the automobile. Then I went to a B2B company called Coldwell Banker because I wanted the field to report to me, and I did that there. And then I knew I needed financial services in a larger company, so I went to Allstate, which was a multi-billion, $60 billion company. I reported to the president there. And then finally technology. And so that's how I ended up at Microsoft. And so that was 25 years or so of being a practitioner. And then in 2006 wrote the book I wish I had had on my desk when I was pushing that rock up the hill, called Chief Customer Officer, which was really the very first book of its time. And so this is my 4th book now. And that's really what I do around the world, is help people to get this work done, whether they're thinking about a Chief Customer Officer. I have a client now, for example, who wants to do the work and isn't sure if that's right for them. as well as uniting leadership teams, getting the work done where they're stalling or are trying to really move forward. So it's joyful.
Very nice. Thank you. And there's one thing you mentioned about being across all of the different types of industries, and as well as in B2C and B2B. Do you see any difference in how this is approached?
Well, you know, in my book called Chief Customer Officer 2.0, I write about 5 competencies. And what's interesting about that is it took me all those years to figure out how to define the action items and the real behaviors that needed to be innate inside of a business. I work with both B2B and B2C clients very regularly, and the competencies are the same. You know, honor customers as assets, align around experience, build a customer listening path that's not just about surveys, be operationally relevant in knowing before they tell you, and leading culture and enabling employees to deliver value. All that's different is the how you might do it inside of those organizations. But here's what's interesting. Companies are made up of what? Human beings. Customers are what? Human beings. So, and especially in a world where we're living all in Amazon time, and we're taking our cues for how we want to be treated in B2B from B2C, it's all kind of connecting now.
Yeah, that's super. That's true. I completely agree that, you know, the values are the same at the bottom of it. Since you just mentioned surveys, and we analyze a lot of survey data at Thematic. What we see is that people tend to be fixated on the metric, and I know that this is like a red flag for you.
Yes, it is.
And it is for us as well, because it's really not about the metric, but about the actual feedback that people are giving and making sure it's being listened. So I loved what you said about in your book, how it was a quote from somebody who said that companies should be not metric driven, but mission driven.
That's right. I love that story, don't you? That's Safe Light Auto Glass. Yes, very interesting, because they're entrenched in the automotive industry, which is such big on survey begging, right? I mean, who hasn't gotten the call from their auto dealer, please give me a 10, but yet they're pushing back on it. They're saying, this is what we stand for, and we're going to look for and reward and motivate behaviors that have what they call the Safe Light spirit, which is fantastic, because when you let people rise, when you elevate people's role, they will rise right to it.
And how do you see the value of the data-driven insights specifically? I know it's really everything about making people listen to customers. And I like the idea of the customer room, and I'm sure it would be great for our listeners to hear a bit more about this.
Sure.
But I feel like it also needs to start with some sort of a base, and there are 2 types of people, you know, the analytical ones just love data. How do you see this?
Well, again, you know, in both the new book I wrote, Would You Do That to Your Mother, and the Chief Customer Officer 2.0 book, which was the book right before that, as well as what I practice with leaders, what we make it be about is storytelling. Now, storytelling definitely can include and should include the data, but the order of the storytelling is what's important. So, you know, if we're talking about the 3rd stage of your journey, I'm also an advocate of taking multiple sources of information and creating a balanced story by stage of the journey. Because otherwise, you know, what happens is social media presents and people go off on the social media data, and the survey results come in and we go off on the survey results, and some leader goes off into the field and comes back and says, this is what's broken, and we go, and we're skirmishing constantly and reactive. But if you take that information and organize it by stage of the journey, your social and your survey and your other works, it's going to start pointing at the same direction. But the idea of storytelling is, as a result of the experience we delivered, did we earn the right to grow? Did we honor the customer's life? Let's look at this stage. Here's maybe the stage is onboarding if you're in B2B, or delivering a package, or, you know, whatever it might be. Here's customers, what they're saying in social media. Here's what's on our forums. Let me show you what we're making the customer do. So we show the effort. Here's the screenshots. Here's how many screens our phone operators or our people have to toggle between. Here's what the package looks like. Okay, now let's look at the verbatims from our surveys. And here's our operational metrics. Operational listening is just as important. And then finally, as a result, here's some of the scores we earned. So I like the score is okay, but I like it to be the validation of the information. So the storytelling it paints a picture. It's also experiential. You know, a lot of times if we know, for example, we're going to talk about something that's crazy that's happening, we also, if we can, send the leaders out to do it. So if it's downloading or signing up for an account or trying to return something, because a lot of times we're so high up in our organizations or we're so removed, we don't go through a lot of the stuff we put our customers through, which is, again, a lot. In the mom book, I call it the shenanigans, right? We put our customers through a lot of things. So I think the storytelling and the order of the storytelling is what's really important. Do you agree?
I agree. I feel like if we think of software, just because of how many different pieces are required, I can't really imagine there would be, one piece of software that combines all of this in one. It's really, there needs to be a person at an organization that puts together that story.
Yeah,
right.
It's not a magic pill. And that's why often companies have a chief customer officer or a team of people. In my podcast show, that's why I call it the human duct tape show, right? Because someone or some group of people, to your point, have to really be deliberate about uniting it and also getting agreement inside the organization about the categorization. Because if social categorizes one way, it won't roll up the same way if the survey data doesn't. So there's a whole, you've got to herd the cats. Maybe 12 different parts of your organization are sending surveys. So you're asking customers the same thing differently 5 ways. And your categorization. So much of it is about uniting and aligning and getting people to give up a little of what they own so that you can create a one company approach, as well as not drive your customers crazy.
Yeah, customers love filling out surveys, right?
Yeah, well, and you must see it too. We're seeing less and less because it's just become so hectic for them.
Yeah, well, I think you truly need to be engaged with a brand or have either an amazing, super positive experience, or the opposite to actually share it. And I'm the same.
Yeah, well, and what's interesting is when we very rarely at Land's End did surveys because we were constantly talking to our customers. For example, when I talk about it, and can I hold the book up, the new mom book? So
yes.
Here's a new book. Would you do that to your mother? So in this book, I actually talk about at Land's End when we were starting to create swimming suits for women, which is the worst article of clothing that a woman probably has to buy in her life. We had a big swimming pool, and we would actually fly in customers and watch them swim. And when they got out, see where they tugged and were uncomfortable. So we were back then constantly talking to them. But once in a while, we would send a letter about something. Like one time we sent out some towels and they weren't great. And so and our response rates were like 95%, which I think gets right back to how engaged our customers were at that time, because those response rates are unheard of.
Yeah.
It was also before we were all being so bombarded with.
But you also showed them that you really cared.
And that there was a human. They felt there was a real human behind what we were sending as well. Yeah.
Let's talk about your book. First of all, can we see it again? I love the title and I love the cover.
Yes, and it's here it is. Can you see it?
Yes. Would you do that to your mother? And I have it right here on my Kindle.
It's the Make Mom Proud standard for how to treat your customers. And you know what's interesting is the way I wrote it was to be 32 toolkits for people, because not everybody has a chief customer officer or a whole team of people. And it's written in such a way that anybody in the organization can consume it. And so, for example, can you see the comic?
Yeah.
So each of the main stories, 32 stories, starts with a comic, and then there's a little intro, and then you always have a one-page case study, and then a mom lens to evaluate, you know, your behavior inside your company. So you can read one or two of these and get going immediately. It's not like, you know, the work has become so difficult, I think, and so challenging. So I wanted to give people hope.
Yes, and it's peppered with case studies. It's not just those separate pages, but even in the content, it's always example.
Yes, I actually did research for over 6 or 7 months, plus my whole 35 years of doing the work. And to your point, there's 85 companies named in the book, and then the 35, because even in the build up to the case study, I felt like I needed to talk about real examples so it wasn't so conceptual, right? We needed to say, here's what we mean, and here's what they do, and here's how they overcame it. You know, like the Hootsuite, right? They had the czar of bad systems or whatever that they created, which wasn't a case study, but it was a really fun story in the lead up to the case study in that section. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit more about this specific example, because I think or a different one, like your favorite case study.
Yeah, well, you know, what's fun is the way the book was written too, was that it's very organized to go by basically the 4 different dimensions of our life as customers. So the first chapter is called the first big chapter, Be the Person I Raised You to Be, which is all about employees and taking care of our employees and letting them do what they wish they could do, right? But otherwise, sometimes we box them in. So there's a wonderful case study in there about a company, let me find this, named Pal's Sudden Service. And they're a hamburger and hot dog stand. And I put that in there. You can see this here. I put that in there because they, you know, a lot of companies with transient frontline teenagers would say, well, it's too hard. Well, this is a company that works hard to hire the human behind the resume, right? So it's less about how good you are at making hamburgers and hot dogs. They can train that. It's more about who are you as a person, because they're, you know, they want to create warmth and caring. You know, you have about 25 seconds when you stick your hand out that delivery window to deliver a fast food meal. And so their process is a 60-point psychometric survey that they ask these people, things like, in general, I feel good about myself, or, you know, I think it's important to trust people I've just met, or I want to raise my voice to get attention. You know, I don't want those people, but they put them in real life situations to get to know who they are, and that makes a difference. I mean, this is a company that's only lost 7 general managers in 33 years. You know, and their revenue per square foot is like 3 times their competition. And so that's the other thing I do in each of these case studies, is really prove that good behavior, right? This is a virtuous way to grow.
Yeah. Something perhaps not controversial, but I wanted to share with you and get your view on related to this. So that's right. So your first chapter is all about employee, employee and making them empowered to make the right decision, do it right by the customer.
Yes, exactly. And not feel pushed down, right?
Yeah.
You know, so much turnover exists because employees aren't given the ability to use their brain, to use their heart, and to combine the two to make the right decision.
Yeah. And there is a big trend right now where people say it's all about employee engagement, and it starts with employee engagement, and then the customers are happy. But I don't know if you know another customer experience expert, Maurice Fitzgerald. So he did actually a study based on publicly available indexes of employee happiness and customer happiness, and he found that they don't always match up. So there are companies where employees are super happy, especially, you know, tech companies in the Valley have that because they just get so much things thrown at And
Right.
but then the customers aren't always happy.
Well, and that would make that might, I mean, are most of those B2B companies where the disconnect is occurring?
B2C.
B2C,
Yeah.
because tech companies are usually B2B.
Not necessarily. So,
No,
you know,
true.
Facebook and LinkedIn and all of those
True.
companies.
So there's B2B and B2C. Well, and are they mostly technology companies? I'm just curious. It's really interesting. And I do think there must be some anomalies, but in general, especially around these kinds of things where you've got people interacting directly with customers. So Facebook doesn't necessarily have people directly interacting with customers, or LinkedIn. I mean, they might, but not in a general purpose. And again, I'm not refuting his research because it's fascinating. But when you've got employees who are interacting with customers, giving them information, for example, about the lifetime value of a customer. So, you know, one of the things I ask in there is, would you turn down your mom's warranty claim 3 days out of warranty? Well, you know, you and I would both want to know, well, what's her lifetime value? How long has she been around? What are the circumstances? And then give me that information, train me how to make good decisions, and then trust me. You know, I call that letting policy and the golden rule collide. So I think that when you have heavy front-facing industries, retail, healthcare, hospitality, especially those industries, perhaps that's where the real correlation exists. I haven't seen this study, so I'd love to see it.
Yeah, I'll share it with you. So another example from a tech company was to actually not hire any call center, and I thought it was really clever. So instead, they had a big red telephone in their office, and it was smack in the middle.
Oh, and everybody had to answer it?
Yes. So when it rang, they would, whoever is around would pick up and talk to customers.
That's fantastic. I love that. That's fascinating. Because what we know is the voice of the human in our ear changes everything. Yeah. I thought you were going to say they just had a bot. I'm glad you.
No. No. I think.
I love that. That's really brave of them.
Yeah. And because it's a shared office space, you know,
Who was that?
It was one of the survey companies, actually. So Forms company. The name escapes me right now, but yeah, the tech. I think any company should do this.
It's fascinating. Well, you know, most companies have to go through a process where they force the executives. It's your turn. You have to go listen to calls. You know, I love that idea. Or, you know, maybe not all the calls, but some calls, so that they're going into there and people have to answer the phone. It's genius. I love it.
Yeah, and another example, you know, you say tech company means they thought about a bot, but I think it's really a misnomer, because the true companies that succeed, and we experienced this ourselves at Y Combinator, that the accelerator in Silicon Valley that give birth to Airbnb and Dropbox and super successful companies, they are so focused on listening to customers. This is like the number one thing.
Yes.
And even the Y Combinator themselves. So at the end of the program, when we all joined in to celebrate, the number one thing that the director asked me, what can we do better? It's in a conversation.
Love that.
It's special.
Yeah. Well, and I wasn't making a generalization, but a lot of people the pendulum seems to be swinging to bots and technology and AI, and all of that can be valuable. But if you don't start with the life and how you're improving the life and how that might be part of the solution, but not all of it, then it's just a technology solution. It's not a human solution. So thank you. That's fantastic.
We've talked for a while, and what I'd love to hear from you is, given all of these experiences that you had over the past years, what are the major trends you're seeing, other than people wanting, you know, technology in the customer experience space?
Sure. Well, you know, customer experience has become very popular now. The challenge with any kind of trend, you know, we've been through TQM and quality and CRM and all of these trends that have a lot of light around them. The challenge and the opportunity is to not make them be the thing of the moment. I've been doing customer experience work my whole career. It just now happens to be the it thing. So what we need to make sure is that it doesn't become so rote and mechanical, you know, VOC for its own sake, journey mapping. And we, you know, that at the end of the day, customer experience is about leadership. It's about determining how you will and will not grow. And so I think what we're seeing in customer experience is a lot of effort, but not necessarily a lot of deep transformation in how companies behave and act. And that's why I wrote this mom book, because it's, you know, I call it tough love wrapped in velvet. We need to fundamentally shift back to why we're in business in the first place. And then, yes, bring these things to bear, but start with the life, start with honoring the life, start with why you're leading a business. I think the other thing that's happening, we're seeing research with millennials, but everybody, is that we are gravitating more and more to the companies whose values align with our own. And, you know, as much as technology is taking hold, what's old is new. High tech is creating a yearning for high touch again, right? We you know, the red phone, and we've got people drawing on boards and blackboards and just reaching out to customers and talking to them in human ways. I think that we're seeing that as well.
Thank you. That's really interesting.
You're welcome.
So I think let's announce the winners of the book before we sign off.
Okay.
So one of the people the first one is Melanie Balinas from Open Edge.
Oh, hey Melanie, congratulations.
Yeah, she's on the call as well. Then we have Devin Anuzis from Benchmark Quality.
Ah.
Michael Hackinson from Visma in Sweden.
Oh,
and sorry, in Norway. Then Sangram Reddy from Answer Financial in California, and Megan McKinnon from ParkWiz.
Oh, well, congratulations, everybody. There's a wonderful story about Sweden in the book. You'll have to find it. It's in the last book, in the last chapter called Take the High Road, about transparency. Did you read that story?
Yeah, I think so. I think Sweden is just, and Scandinavia in general have some really, really fascinating companies. And
well, the whole thing was actually the country of Sweden. They had been going, they've been getting away from, you know, overseeing everything, and they wanted to be a more transparent country, and so they created a phone line that and it's like your red phone. Anybody in the world could call, and they got volunteers from Sweden citizens all around the world, and you could call this number and you would reach a citizen saying what it was like to live in Sweden.
Yeah.
And people just I love, you know, and that was to celebrate their ending of censorship. So we're not going to censor our people. Call us and we'll just talk openly. So it was their version of the red phone, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so.
Well, on this note, I would like to thank you for joining us and sharing all of this knowledge and information from all of the books that you've written, and encourage everybody to buy Make Mom Proud and join the movement.
Yes, thank you. Yes, would you do that to your mother? It's a book I wrote for everybody to make the work easier and more enjoyable. So thank you. It's been a pleasure to be with you all.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.